In the wake of the Crusader Kings III release date announcement, I decided to dive into the details of the medieval period and learn more about the reality behind the game mechanics. This is the first video of many in which I want to take you on a journey through the medieval world and apply what we see to Crusader Kings mechanics. Today, I want to take a long look at maritime warfare of the Middle Ages. It is an often misunderstood topic because the core of it is rarely discussed. We all know of the expeditions of William the Bastard and Harold Hardrada to England, both crossing the sea for that purpose. We know the stories of the Crusaders making their way to the Holy Land, of the Vikings plundering and pillaging the coastlines, but we never ask, where did the boats come from? What was a journey at sea like? Was the best defense against enemy fleets to meet them on the water? And should I still be scared of the Vikings even today? This is History Reloaded, with me, one proud Bavarian. Let's dive in. The book War at Sea in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance has been the main resource for this video amongst many others, and clearly establishes that, with very few exceptions, naval warfare within the time span of Crusader Kings was a matter of ad hoc formations and brown water operations. Ad hoc formations refer to military units established to serve one particular purpose instead of being intended for solving a generalized issue. There are numerous examples of this, such as the organization of Viking raids. Every raid group was a so-called lith, a private endeavor organized by willing individuals and their households that decided to go and plunder foreign shores by pooling their resources together for a one-time endeavor. Two ships and crews working together more than once in multiple raids was a product of convenient coincidence instead of planned navy building. The idea of an actually organized navy is an injection of our modern understanding of that concept. Today, we operate with permanently employed and thoroughly trained seamen. The Viking fleets, however, were assembled only for one particular operation each time. The way the Vikings operated was not the exception, it was the rule. Much of William the Bastard's fleet for his invasion of England was built by his vassals that in turn gained rights or property, but also by chartering and seizing civilian vessels. The fleet dissolved for good immediately after it served its purpose, with some of it being burned right away. What needs to be stressed is that there was little variety in purpose for fleets at the time. In most cases, any fleet was only as useful as much as its leader needed it to transport troops or armaments to lands across the water. This meant that the maintenance of a permanent fleet, while appearing logical to the modern eye, was a costly and ludicrous concept to almost all realms. Individual merchant, fishing and transport ships were active in almost all regions of the medieval world and could simply be chartered or conscripted for the purpose of troop transport. Additionally, whenever more ships would be needed, they could simply be constructed. Forests were practically everywhere. The few exceptions of this ad hoc nature of navies during the time period can be attributed to the Mediterranean Sea, and even there had a highly limited form of existence. The East Roman Empire and the Fatimid Caliphate are the major exceptions, both having long-lived standing and well-organized navies. The East Roman Empire was a highly coastal realm that depended on its navy to keep pirates away or face economic doom. Additionally, the loss of its provinces along the Levant and Egypt put the very core of the empire at risk of being conquered by the advancing Muslim forces, making a fleet even more vital than ever before. This led to the rather rare situation during the Middle Ages in which a standing fleet was a logical solution to an existing problem, instead of a nonsensical costly extravagance. The empire organized its fleet first in a centralized approach as the Caravesiani, but later, while still maintaining an imperial fleet, handed down the obligation to its administrative districts, the Thermas. This allowed the East Roman Empire to utilize highly regionalized forces for quick responses against enemy incursions. The naval system of the East Roman Empire was the most sophisticated one of its time. It should also be said that the empire did of course possess and utilize the so-called Greek fire. However, the actual effect this had on its naval strategy is uncertain, as the usage cases that have been recorded are few and far between, so I won't dive into this for the moment. The Fatimids, on the other hand, began building a comparably sophisticated standing fleet while they were still based in modern-day Tunisia. Caliph Abdallah al-Mahdi Billah constructed a great port in Al-Mahdiya, utilized to quickly produce and maintain a fleet that could safely navigate the central Mediterranean Sea, for the Fatimids had much to gain from access to Sicily, southern Italy and the Tyrrhenian Sea. The auspicious geography of the region allowed them to resupply in Tunisia without any difficulties and then go out, raid, conquer and pillage. After the Fatimids shifted their center of power to Egypt, they erected similar infrastructure over there, but their naval abilities were much more restricted by the geography of the eastern Mediterranean Sea in comparison to their opportunities with the positioning of Tunisia. The republics of Genoa, Pisa and Venice, contrary to a commonly held belief, operated on an ad hoc basis for the longest time, and only started establishing standing navies in the 13th, fully building a permanent system in the 14th century, at the end of the Crusader Kings timeline. There are very limited examples for a prototype of a standing navy from the Scandinavian countries, most notably the lading system in Denmark. However, the lading system was primarily a system for manpower and ship draft to serve the king in coastal defense of the kingdom, not in offensive wars. This changed as centuries went by and the crown took more power from the magnates for itself, enabling the crown to slowly shift the defensive obligation to a limited offensive one. This, however, happened at the end of Crusader Kings timeline. Whether a realm was part of the standing navy elite or not, what is important to point out is this. Naval supremacy as it is envisioned in later times as total control over part of the ocean was simply not possible with the ship and communication forms available to the realms of the period. Despite the highly sophisticated nature of the East Roman fleets, it was an absolute rarity to catch pirates or invaders properly on the water. The purpose of the fleets was intimidation, and more importantly, a swift response once the enemy had set foot on land. As stated previously, most naval activities with military characteristics were focused on troop transport, which in turn of course means that at some point the fleet would be idle on the coast, up a river, or even be beached. This would be the exact moment to exploit, seeing as an incoming defending fleet could cut off the retreat of the enemy and destroy their means of mobility. A loss of mobility meant that the land forces of the defender would have enough time to assemble and dispatch of the invading forces. This brings us to the second major aspect, the brown water nature of medieval navies and its implication for naval warfare in Crusader Kings. Brown water navy is a modern term created during the American Civil War that describes a navy operating in rivers and nearshore environments. While the term is modern, medieval naval warfare was restricted to this aspect of operations entirely, with activities far from land other than troop and goods transport being practically impossible, considering the naval technology at the time. Naval warfare being primarily a supporting actor within the land warfare system is a logical result of the historical conditions. The logistics of catching a fleet when at sea comes with several impracticalities, as the reaction time of the defending realm was mostly far too long to make this method of defense viable, with the fleet then taking a while to arrive as well, likely to find no enemies whatsoever. On the other hand, the invading fleets had to make landfall at some point, meaning that a highly effective form of defense was to track the boats with sophisticated coastal signal systems and engaging when the aggressors were in the process of raiding or besieging fortified locations. Establishing such a coastal defense system is of course easier said than done. The Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba reacted to the severe Viking raids of 844, the sacking of Ishbilia and several other major cities by establishing an elaborate network of coastal outposts that proved to be a reliable way to predict the landfall of raiding parties. While the newly established office of the Amir al-Bahr, meaning Commander of the Sea, and bases of the title Admiral would also commission organized squadrons, the primary reaction to seaborne enemies was to engage them in land battles as quickly as possible once landfall had occurred, while simultaneously stopping them from retreating back to sea by burning their boats, with the help of the regionally stationed squadrons and ad hoc commissioned ships. The Fatimids lost much of their naval prowess after moving to Egypt, simply because an assault on the East Roman, and generally speaking non-Muslim lands, required them to either go along the entire coast of the Levant and Asia Minor, or traverse the vast waters of the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. It is easy for us to look at the distance and scoff, but freshwater supplies of a ship were quickly used up, which was problematic in two ways. It could either lead to the rowers of a ship simply becoming enfeebled while at sea within a few hours of running out, disabling the movement ability of the ship, or it could lead to an entire fleet being stuck in hostile territory, as they can no longer undertake the journey home to its friendly ports where it could resupply. This was not an issue in Tunisia, it was an issue, however, in Egypt. Naval activities of this period beyond transport were, in this sense, mostly support activities to destroy the mobility of a land-bound army, so that there could then be an on-ground engagement. Even blockades were a difficult endeavor, with the academic consensus being that commercial blockades as we know them from other grand strategy games were completely unfeasible, with the ships at the time. Additionally, even siege-related blockades were not just a rare endeavor, but also most of the time quite fruitless. The Arab invasion forces that attempted to take Constantinople in 717 sought to blockade the city. While the fleet later would be destroyed with a mysterious Greek fire, leaving the Arab army to starve, reports suggest that the Arab fleet was not able to maintain a continuous blockade of the city to begin with, despite its size and tactics. Another classic case that is brought up when talking about medieval naval siege warfare is the sack of Constantinople in 1204 by the Crusaders, but the naval activity in this case was not a blockade of Constantinople, but rather an actual seaside assault. This is, of course, much more viable as it describes the core functions of ships in this period, transporting troops. There were of course pure naval engagements, but all of them within reach of the coast and oftentimes with a land battle component. The legendary Battle of Hafrsfjord that resulted in the unification of Norway under Harald Fairhair was fought between two navies, but had a substantial degree of land combat as the losing side simply abandoned their ships, sought retreat on the nearby islets and would perish there, not on their ships. Naval engagements even along the coastline mostly knew two variants. It was either one fleet surprising another while the crew was raiding, conquering or otherwise, for example in the aftermath of a storm occupied, or it was pure gamble. I cannot stress enough just how much of a gamble it really was. The Fatimids had a highly sophisticated standing fleet system that allowed them to raid, engage in wars and even press other realms into paying tribute, but out of all the actual naval engagements that the Fatimids participated in, they only won 50%. The total amount of actual naval engagements the Fatimids participated in throughout their 250 years of existence is a glorious 12. The dedicated standing fleets of the East Roman Empire, the Fatimids, did not dominate their respective regions by virtue of having a huge advantage in actual combat engagements, seeing as those were too rare to speak of any noticeable difference in sailors' quality or even a generalized tactics advantage, but instead in the short amount of time to organize naval endeavors in the first place, as well as in the ability to rebuild quicker than anybody else after losing a naval battle. Both the Fatimids and the Empire lost many of their naval engagements, but were unrivaled in rebuilding whenever necessary. All of this lets us come to a more realistic conclusion on how Crusader Kings should handle boss. CK2's depiction of fleets as units is highly flawed gameplay-wise and historically speaking. This gameplay mechanic completely fails to address the vast majority of realms not utilizing any form of a standing fleet or even fleet levies. The simple topic of CK2's fleets being raised and being able to be maintained independent from an ad hoc assembly is completely counter to the historical reality. What this system does do, however, is deny landlocked realms the opportunity to reliably take to the sea. CK2 does possess some highly limited ways of raising ships via mercenaries and merchants, but this blows completely past the actual issue. Landlocked realms were perfectly able to hire ships if they had the money. It would summa summarum simply come at a higher cost than for a coastal realm. Sea travel was not really a mystery in any of Crusader Kings' regions, neither in 769 nor in 1453. CK3's system, on the other hand, reflects the reality of fleets serving the specific purpose of troop transport and being chartered, built, and raised specifically for the execution of a one-time mission. As explained earlier, there are exceptions to this ad hoc organizational form, but they are exceedingly rare in the game's timeframe, and while they do deserve a fleshed-out approach, are not at all an adequate inspiration for a generalized system of the reality of seafaring in Crusader Kings' timeframe. CK3's system also allows for the player to fill in the gaps whether the money spent on an army taking to the sea is spent on raising ships, building ships, or chartering ships, making it much more flexible to begin with. In that sense, CK3's system is much more appropriate historically speaking and gameplay-wise. Not only does it eliminate unnecessary and meaningless micromanagement, but it also is closer to reality. Warfare-wise, pure naval battles were rare, and oftentimes a combination of naval and land warfare simply because of the supporting nature of navy activity in general. While it is true that Crusader Kings should include purely coastal naval battles and reflect the historical reality, it is also a historical reality that the ad hoc nature of naval operations and the rarity of proper naval engagements made every single naval battle into an extreme gamble, effectively leading to a gameplay system in which the player's input is almost entirely irrelevant. Scholars do generally agree that the East Roman Navy, despite its highly advanced organizational format, was nowhere near unbeatable in battle, but instead prevailed simply because the East Roman Empire was able to rebuild naval forces quicker than any of its opponents, at least for the longest time of its existence. This means that a combat engagement system at sea would be nothing more than a gamble on good circumstances like weather, poorly organized enemies, small tactical choices made by navy commanders, and many other things that the player has no input on whatsoever. On any given Sunday, one navy can beat any navy. Medieval navy warfare in that sense is not at all comparable to the quality and quantity differences of later sea warfare, as seen in the time periods covered by EU4, Wiki 2 and Hoi 4. A game mechanic based on disrespecting the player's agency and RNG is one of the biggest mistakes a game can make, so instead Crusader Kings chooses to attach penalties to armies that just landed or are in the process of landing, which gives the player and the AI the choice whether they want to engage or not. In conclusion, CK3's system is vastly more comfortable and accurate in comparison to CK2's system. This system is not perfect, however, and an implementation of actual naval range would make especially the gameplay in the Mediterranean Sea much more interesting, as the fight over islands suddenly becomes vital, otherwise you will not be able to safeguard the home shores. The Fatimids failed at some point, got raided by the Genoese, and this opened up the way for sea supply of the First Crusade. The other way around, of course, the Fatimids did the same to the Genoese earlier, raided their city and took Genoa out of the game for quite some time. The criticism of CK3 armies walking on water is definitely a good meme, but does not hold up at all, considering that it costs in time and money to move on to sea zones more accurately describes the ad hoc organization of a transport fleet than CK2's system. Ideally, CK3 will let us improve our capability to organize such a fleet, be it by obligating our vassals similar to the Danish lading, or by building regional buildings that then reduce the cost in time and money to go on to a sea zone. Normandy and Flanders, for example, were important regions for the North Sea shipbuilding industry that made transport much cheaper. A historical depiction of naval battles should remain outside of the game, unless the fanbase desires to be very angry at Paradox until it is patched out again. With all of this being said, navies in the Middle Ages were an incredibly interesting topic, and this video, while being grounded on a multitude of sources, only cuts into the aspects relevant to Crusader Kings. If you have any questions about further details of the naval situation of the time, feel free to ask them in the comments and I will see what I can answer. For the moment, I would like to thank the members of the channel for giving me the opportunity to research things such as this one by supporting the channel directly. Firstly, the Barons: Aaron, Stefan, the Richest T, Snywolf, Elmar Mello, Thomas, Mitchell, MFW, Florian, Dan, the Murcielago, Jacob, Rex Romanorum, Falling Phoenix, and Eterna. Secondly, the Counts: Shifty, Wombat, Kazan, and Lachlan. And last but not least, the absolutely beautiful Dukes: Suspicious Duck, Nathan, Jack, Kenneth, Lexo, Goodfield, Eric, and Aiden. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Depending on the feedback on this episode, I might make more of these thoroughly researched videos on a more regular basis. For now, yes, you should still fear the Vikings, even today. Later, Alligator.